Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stluke'sonline.org. Idaho Matters is taking a deep dive into the loss of farmland here in the Gem State. Are you a farmer? What challenges do you face as farmland shrinks in Idaho? We want to hear your story. Email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or leave us a voicemail using the Talk to Us feature in the Boise State Public Radio app. And then listen to our series on farming called Land and Legacy. Episodes available on Monday afternoons in the Idaho Matters podcast feed. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Over a 5-year period from 2017 to 2022, there was a 7% decline in the number of farms in America. That meant a loss of 20 million acres of farmland, roughly the size of the state of Maine. And here in Idaho, more than 2,000 farms disappeared during that time. So what kind of impact is that having on cities and counties? What does that mean for the farmers who are left? And how will future growth impact the agricultural industry here in Idaho? And how are farmers and their advocates working to preserve their community and their identity for the future? Well, Idaho Matters is exploring these questions with our new series. We're calling it Land and Legacy, Farming in Idaho. We're sitting down with farmers and planners, city managers, and experts to cover a wide array of topics, including the challenges farmers are facing, how growth is impacting farming, urban farmers, and younger farmers, as well as land use policy and community identity and how it affects planning and farming. So today, we start with how community affects growth and agriculture. What do you identify with in your community, and how does that community identity shape you? Well, with us today are Mary Huff. She is the planning director for Owyhee County. Roger Brooks is an urban planner, and Grace Crookham-Guy is the marketing and events coordinator for Grow Idaho. I want to welcome all of you to the program today.
Thank you, Gemma, and to the rest of the team for this opportunity. We're really happy to be here.
So Grace, let me start with you then. For folks who aren't familiar, what is Grow Idaho? What do you do exactly?
Grow Idaho kind of wants to take in all these considerations when it comes to growth. That's policy, that's the memories that we have with the land. That's where we establish ourselves. And we wanted to start the series off with Mary Huff and Roger Brooks because their expertise on community engagement and planning is what inspired us to create Grow Idaho. We wanted to share their vision of when we talk about our communities, there's a lot to consider, and sometimes this can seem overwhelming. We want to think about what's our history, where do we want to go, and keep this vision in focus.
So Mary, tell us what a planning director does.
Planning director, for when you're talking about in a county, is the steward of all of the land use plans and the day-to-day interactions with the citizens that we serve. So it just kind of sets the tone and the pace and the ability for the public to engage with our planning department and help shape the future of the community that they love and want to live in.
So Roger, speaking of the future, tell us what a futurist is. How do you help cities plan for future growth?
Well, we always look at cities from here's where you are today. Where do you want to grow? Where do you want to be when you grow up, so to speak? And so we always take a look at what do you want to be? How do you envision your city, your town, your county in 25 years from right now? And what happens between now and then? That's responsible growth. And so what you have to do is kind of predict how many people are going to live there, what your schools are like, what your farms, your parks, all of those amenities, quality of life things, and try to put that together that really tries to gauge for the future. And, in most cities, we're putting out fires constantly. And so somebody has to sit there and say, well, where do we want to go? What is our vision? And that's where a futurist and a lot of urban planning comes into play.
So Grace, why is it important for communities to really think about their future and have a plan for growth?
specifically when I think about Idaho, I think about something like, what resources do we have that we want to protect? What keeps people working and thriving? What increases or stabilizes taxes? And for much of Idaho, this is agriculture, which is a leading industry in the state and is being fractured every year. Many of us in agriculture and ranching struggle to farm between the cracks of suburban housing, traffic, complaints from neighbors, trash, and other things that growth brings with it. And as Roger said, planning can address this. And on the other hand, a lack of planning can be reckless, leading to costly mistakes such as destruction of an economy that the community has relied upon for decades. So I like to frame the question as, how should we be growing? Because I think that is where we have control, how to grow.
So Grace, tell us what a plan well, live well model is.
The Plan Well, Live Well model, it actually comes from a speech that Mary had given a while ago, but it focuses first on identity, which is, how all of us can identify with what is important. And that's kind of what I just talked about, of like, what resources do we have? What keeps people working and thriving? What stabilizes taxes, et cetera? And then the next step, once we've established that, is to stop the harm that's being done. And in Idaho, that is fractured farmland, and that comes with planning, right? And then the next step is to keep growing the vision by letting anyone be empowered to engage with their local governments. And it's everywhere from the state to the neighborhood level. If people know what they're talking about, know what they want to ask for, and we do it as a collective, we can achieve a lot more than I think we expect.
So, Mary, Owyhee County officials say agriculture really is the cornerstone of your county's economy. So how is the county planning for the future?
Well, agriculture, in our agricultural zones, we have heard it loud and clear from our citizens that they intend for ag to stay ag. And with that, we have planned very deliberately and intentionally where we can handle the growth in our residential and multi-use zones, help support our cities become strong. They're small cities, small rural cities, but to help them become strong rural cities that thrive and have jobs and some level of walkability and community in those places. And by planning more intentionally around the periphery of those, that's taken some of the pressure off of our agricultural land. So our landscape scale production agriculture can continue to thrive as well without intrusion or infiltration from more urban type development or subdivisions.
So, Roger, when we hear these terms, identity and branding, is this a strategic process? I mean, how does that actually work when we start talking about things like that?
Yeah, and that's my very favorite question, because people need to realize, first of all, branding is not about logos and slogans. It's about the essence of who you are. What do you want to be when you grow up? So, for instance, Sandpoint is very much a tourism community, very lake-oriented. Caldwell, Nampa, this area has become really the wine region, the Sunny Slope Wine Trail right here in the Caldwell area. And so branding is, what do you want to be when you grow up, and what differentiates you from everywhere else? That's what a traditional brand was. So every community, I say, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be known for? Are you an agricultural community? Are you going to be an urban residential community? And once you decide what it is you want to be, then you make it look like that and feel like. So, for instance, if you had a downtown and you want downtown to be about kids and family, I might say, where do we put the water feature? Where do we put the carousel? Where do we get restaurants and retail that supports kids and family? See, so branding is the backbone of what do you want to be when you grow up? And many communities were founded on one industry, but over time they lost that industry, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's timber, whether it is agriculture. And then you say, well, what is our second act? In many communities, as a matter of fact, most communities across the country are even looking for, what is our second act? What do we do now after we lose our core industry? In the case of Idaho, and particularly the agriculture, the struggle is, can we keep that industry without losing it so we don't always have to go, what is our next act? But branding is that essence of what do we want to be when we grow up?
So, Roger, before we went to break, we talked about that difference between branding and community identity. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into community identity and why it's so important. So, what role really does like common identity, Roger, play in how a city and even a county truly plan for growth?
Well, you always have to start with that question. You know, what happens is most communities don't have a vision. They're just there and they're doing what they've always done, and they just kind of live with whatever happens. In this way, you can chart your own future. So if you want to be a tourism-oriented community, then what do we need to do to grow that? And what kind of industry, what kind of businesses do we need to attract? If you say, well, we want to be a wine area, which is part of agriculture, then say, well, how do we promote that? And what do we need to provide to make that work? So I always say you start with your brand, and then all your growth, all your planning and everything supports that. And people will move to places that fit there. They may say, I want to live out in farming country. Or they'll say, no, I'd rather live in an urban environment, or I want to live in a place that's really well known for its youth, or sports, or whatever it is, recreation. And so the branding is always the very foothold, and then all your planning and everything builds on that, including your business opportunities.
So, Roger, can a community identity help create loyalty to where someone lives? I mean, I'm thinking about, let's take Boise, for example. I love all the things that Boise has to offer. I call myself kind of a downtown snob. I mean, I love the downtown area. I love, all of the things that the downtown area has to offer. I think it's a great place to raise kids, et cetera, et cetera. With that said, though, you talk to folks who, were born and raised here and how different Boise was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And they may appreciate the new in Boise, but there is a definite, melancholy, I guess, in a way of what it used to be. So how do you create that loyalty even as you continue to grow?
Yeah, and it'll cater to different people. There are people like yourself that love living in that urban or like being in that urban environment. In some case, one thing I didn't touch on is what you call rebranding. And speaking of Boise, when we first started helping the city of Caldwell about 12 years ago, we would go into Boise and they'd say, well, what brings you to Boise? And I go, we're working out in Caldwell. And they would apologize. I mean, Caldwell needed rebranding because Caldwell was like the dregs of the Boise area. So in this case, we had to create a new identity for Caldwell so that the wineries would, most of the Boise area wineries are in Caldwell, but they didn't want to be associated with Caldwell. So we're trying to change the tide so you can create loyalty. Creating Indian Creek Plaza in downtown Caldwell was a very pivotal point in the future of the city of Caldwell. All of a sudden, it created a sense of pride, a sense of loyalty. It took a downtown that was 90% dead and turned it around into a place where people want to live and they want to come and hang out. And so some of that loyalty comes from the product. Once you know what you want to be, and many communities need that, what we call rebranding or repositioning.
So, Roger, when a community knows what it wants to be, does that then help the people that live there talk with their community leaders on how they want their cities or their counties to expand? Because it feels, especially in a place like Idaho, it's inevitable when it comes to growth.
It is inevitable. It's a challenge. It's one of the most desirable places to live. But what happens is, and we're running into this in Montana and Wyoming and these other Western states, is what happened is people, something happened during COVID where all of a sudden the millennials, they called them the creative class. They want to move into the urban areas. And I was going, well, not so fast, because once they start getting kids, once they start raising families, they're going to want to be, and safety is number one. So since the pandemic, people have started moving out to rural areas. They wanted to live where it was farm-based. They still didn't mind a subdivision, but they want to be around the agriculture. They want to be around cows and horses and ranching, all of those different elements. And then when we start taking that way, all of a sudden their loyalty kind of dissipates with it, because all of a sudden you kind of took away the soul of what brought people there in the first place.
So, Mary, Waukee County is a more rural county. How do you make a healthy, vibrant community in a place that is, more rural, more agricultural based?
Well, I would argue that is a healthy, vibrant community.
There you
just
go.
Roger was saying, that is the rub, is that people, they want to come out to a place like this because they fall in love with it. But then the very development that they want to do, right? We hear all the time, well, it's just one house, it's not going to hurt anything. Cumulatively, though, when you have that type of development pressure from a Treasure Valley into a rural place like a Waukee County, that impact starts to compound. And we fragment our agricultural lands, and we have development there that then becomes inconvenient for them. It's romanticized and beautiful from a distance, and when you're next door to it, you see all the sights and sounds and smells that ag has with it. That's the point of being very intentional about ag land being reserved for that production type agriculture, which is an economic base. And there's such an economic powerhouse that's happening in these wide open spaces that demands very little services and provides tax revenue. It also has ecological, environmental, just there's so many benefits on so many different levels from leaving that land the way that it is and planning intentionally for our school bus routes and our emergency services and all of those things that the more you sprawl out, it's harder on everybody. There's just a cost of services the farther you go out. So anyway, it is that delicate balance. Everybody does want to live out there. It's just not really sustainable. And we don't want our taxpayers to have to subsidize that type of development that moves in and starts to rise the cost of services for everybody.
So Mary, I'm curious about your opinion on this. Would you say that it's a bit more difficult to make sure you have this, community that is vibrant yet keeps, the ag industry in place in a very healthy way, as opposed to, let's say, like an Ada County, a Boise, where, it's quite, Boise itself, it's quite urban, right? There is a lot of sprawl. But when you have all of these people wanting kind of, as you said, this romanticized idea of what living in the country is, and not understanding that ag is the backbone of the county you live in.
Well, I think I guess I'll answer that in that we have a saying of you don't always have to be the next big thing to be the next big thing. People love it out here, and we're not trying to replicate what anybody else is doing. We're being true to our history and our heritage and our roots, and allowing a place for agriculture to be and to thrive that comes from generations of families that have built that here, and just trying to respect that agricultural zone the same way that we would respect a residential zone or a historic zone, that each of those things are set aside for a specific purpose. And we hold ag in high regard as much as we do our other zones.
Could I expand on
So
that
Mary,
really quick too?
Absolutely.
I think what Mary was saying before as well is that some of the people that are moving here are romanticizing the area because they are not actual producers themselves. They might respect it. They might love the scenery and the access to the outdoors, which, who doesn't? But what ends up happening is when you're hit with the reality of farming, of the smell of manure, people working at 3 a.m., slow tractors on the roads, people go, oh, I was not expecting this. And so what we do to move forward is saying, okay, so these people like having access to the outdoors. They like the respectability of farming. They like being around farming, but they still should be living closer to the city where there's more resources, because if they are not farmers themselves, if they do want to live in a subsidy, we should bring them closer to where the city actually is so that we're not sprawling those resources out. Because what ends up happening is if they're living out in farmland, not only is it making more difficult for those farmers, but it's higher taxes. It's costlier for everybody.
So Mary, how do you as a planner strike that balance that Grace just talked about?
Well, first and foremost for us, and will always be input from the community. So surveying and engaging with our citizens and listening to their voice of what they want. And this is what they've told us they want. The sad part, I guess, to me, my daughter will be fourth generation on the same ranch, is that we do see that shifting to a degree. And I suppose that will happen at some point. But really, I can't stress enough that through community engagement and listening to the voices of the people who live and love that community and who in our community are the volunteers, the teachers. I mean, these are our friends and our neighbors that we do life with, listening to their voice and letting them have a say in what those plans look like and how we grow. And being true to that, even when it changes. But I would say that's all the more reason for, if you love a place so often, there's a crowd that doesn't go. They like how it is, so they don't show up to the meetings. And there's sometimes a small, noisy group that wants change, and they show up loud and in force. So those people who love where they live, I would just beg them to show up to meetings when it matters and say we love what, when it's good. Tell people that too, not just when you're unhappy.
Yeah. So Roger, how then, when there is this tension between growth and preservation, how does branding actually play a role then in understanding a community? Because I'm thinking about, this idea of people maybe wanting to live in certain areas, but maybe not fully understanding that growth and preservation aspect.
Yeah, and I actually believe you can have a mix. So, and I'll use Caldwell since we're working in Caldwell right now and have been working here for like over the last 10 years off and on, is there's an area called where we're calling the Stockyards District. And it's just off of 21st and I-84. And that whole area is next to the fairgrounds and everything. And it is kind of industrial. It's very farm ranch oriented. It's got all the auctions, the livestock auctions, all those things happen there. And yet you can go less than half a mile away and be in an urban downtown that has a plaza and has water, Indian Creek there. And so we really believe you can have a mix so that people in Caldwell don't say, well, we're all ag, so I have to drive to Boise or Meridian or, Nampa or wherever, Eagle, wherever, for all my urban things. We think you can have a mix of those things and really make it a happy environment. I think the challenge is when you're a fast growing community and you own a farm and you could make more money selling your farm for subdivision, it's really tempting. And how do you stop that? And those are those things, is preserving farmlands when you think about farmers struggling, but I really believe you can do a mix of agriculture and where it's 5 minutes away without having to deal with those tractors and the manure and the harvest seasons.
I also want to jump in really quick again, if I can. This is also where zoning comes in. This is why, we're talking about protecting preservation. And I guess the word that has the most material consequence is zoning, because zoning is what protects farmland. It's what makes it, when a developer comes in and says, I want to build a subdivision here, it's what says you can or can't. And ideally, zoning for farmland is where, as you move further and further away from that center, that farmland is more and more protected. And then if you have people that are like, oh, well, I kind of want to be closer to the urban area. I'm that creative millennial class and I want to live in a suburban area. You will be closer to the urban center, not in farmland.
Mary, you mentioned, please show up even when times are good, right? Show up to these community meetings, let your voice be heard. Are there other concrete steps that people can take who are living in an area where they really want to, preserve their way of life when it comes to planning and preparing for the future?
I think just being involved is the best, but Grace just said it perfectly. The zoning is created for a reason, and we don't plan that community based off development pressure. It's a long range plan, and so that ground is set aside for a purpose. So Roger had said, when somebody has a farm and they would like to sell, But what we always hear tagged on is sell for development and subdivisions, but that's not the intent. When it's an
Right.
agricultural zone, we give that next generation. You can sell that ground all you want. It's sold for whatever that zone allows. And in the case here, it's agriculture. And I hope that that next generation can buy that farm and continue to feed our nation by growing food and fiber that we do. And for Owyhee County, also rangeland. So it's not about selling out for subdivisions. It's selling your land when you're ready to sell. Just like I can't sell my land in a residential zone and expect to plop down a feedlot right in the middle of a bunch of subdivisions. We would think that was ridiculous. But we don't give that same honor to our agricultural zones, that we're not going to put subdivisions in the middle of working farmlands. They're just incompatible. It's incompatible in residential, and it's incompatible in the ag zone.
So, Grace, next week on our Land and Legacy series, we'll be talking to farmers about the challenges they're facing. Could you kind of give us a quick idea of how farmers are looking at things like growth and planning?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers for next week's episode, but I just, from the farmers that we've talked to so far, a lot of them are very frustrated, but I also want to emphasize that they are not hopeless. What a lot of them have said, and I think one of the farmers we talked to, where we said, what is your advice for farmers moving in the future, or for younger farmers? And he said, well, find an old farmer, find someone who you want to follow their steps in and you want to move forward with. And just like Mary said, when we sell farmland as farmland, that's how we are able to move forward. When we build cities closer to cities, or they're more centralized, they're not fragmented and sprawling. That's how we also protect farmland. And we keep that kind of city life outside of the actual production industry, like traffic and trash and noise complaints and lawsuits, which you'll hear some of the farmers talk about next week.
Well, I want to thank all three of you so much for such an interesting conversation. We've been speaking with Mary Huff. She is the planning director for Owyhee County. Roger Brooks is an urban planner, and Grace Crookham-Guy, she is the marketing and events coordinator for Grow Idaho. We've been talking about our Land and Legacy Farming in Idaho series. It will continue next Monday at noon right here on Idaho Matters. And you can find out more by going to our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.